Tonight, something is happening in this war that doesn't just raise eyebrows. It stops conversations. It makes analysts lower their voices. Generals pause mid-sentence, and intelligence officials switch off the hallway lights before speaking. Because what unfolded in the early hours of dawn wasn't simply another strike, another explosion, or another headline in a grinding war. No, this was different. This was the kind of moment that bends the trajectory of a conflict. The kind of event that forces even the best-informed insiders to admit they did not see it coming. Not like this. Not this deep. Not with this level of strategic shock. And tonight, the United States is reacting in a way it rarely does. Washington is speaking in tight, deliberate phrases that sound less like diplomacy and more like a warning. A warning directed straight at the Kremlin. But almost instantly, Moscow fired back with a warning of its own, issued with a tone that carried both anger and something far more telling, concern. The world is now staring into the narrow electric space between those two warnings, waiting to see which one will get tested first. Good evening. Tonight we start with a question that until recently would have sounded like pure speculation. Just how deep inside Russia can Ukraine now strike? Because whatever the answer used to be, last week, last month, even yesterday, it no longer applies. It changed today. According to multiple senior officials, Ukraine carried out a strike so far beyond the limits of what Russia believed was possible that it sent shockwaves through Moscow's defense establishment. This wasn't a warehouse. It wasn't an ammo depot. It wasn't a lightly defended outpost near the border. Russia considered this location untouchable, a hardened node far inside its territory, a place strategically insulated from Ukrainian reach. But sometime before dawn, something moved. Something moved. Something approached. Unseen, undetected, uncompromised. What that something was depends entirely on which intelligence officer you talk to. Some say it streaked across the sky at low altitude, hugging terrain to avoid radar. Others insist it launched closer to the target than anyone expected. A few quietly raise eyebrows and suggest a possibility that Western agencies are still scrambling to confirm. That part of this attack may have originated inside Russia itself. Whatever the method, the result was the same: a near-perfect hit. An explosion so forceful that analysts studying the blast signature concluded this was no hobby drone, no improvised device, no lucky strike. This was deliberate. This was engineered. This was part of a plan. And tonight, we can confirm what that target was. Ukraine struck a military command installation located roughly 200 miles inside Russian territory, deep within a region Moscow believed to be secure. And this wasn't just any installation. This was a key command hub used by Russia's Western Military District, one of the critical nodes responsible for coordinating drone attacks, processing reconnaissance data, and supporting missile defense planning along the Ukrainian frontier. In simpler terms, Ukraine hit a nerve center. A location Russia relied on to manage parts of its war, and Ukraine reached it. That alone is extraordinary. But the geopolitical shockwave that followed is just as significant. Within minutes, not hours, Russia's Ministry of Defense went on high alert, releasing a statement so sharp, so accusatory, that U.S. officials immediately began analyzing its tone. Because Moscow didn't simply blame Ukraine, it blamed the United States. Russian officials claimed the strike would have been impossible without direct American involvement. They escalated the accusation further, calling it a hostile act and warning that if further provocations will result in decisive measures. When pressed on what a decisive measures meant, the spokesperson refused to elaborate, which is never a good sign. But then something even more unusual happened. For the first time in months, the United States responded with a formal warning of its own. A warning delivered with no soft edges, no phrases about avoiding misunderstandings, no hedging about intentions. A senior National Security Council official stated plainly that the United States will respond if Russia takes any action, directly or through proxies, that threatens American personnel, assets, or interests. It was short, measured, firm, and absolutely intentional, because Washington issued that statement just hours after Russia issued its threat. That timing was not a coincidence. So what made this particular strike different? Why did this operation, out of the hundreds Ukraine has conducted, ignite such an explosive diplomatic chain reaction? reaction. To understand that, you have to look at two layers, the tactical and the symbolic. Tactically, Ukraine pierced a part of Russia that was supposed to be shielded. This installation wasn't lightly defended. Satellite images show it had recently been reinforced with upgraded air defense systems. Russia clearly believed it was safe. Ukraine proved otherwise. Symbolically, the strike shattered one of the Kremlin's most important illusions. The belief that the Russian interior, hundreds of miles from the border, was immune. That ordinary Russians living far from the conflict could pretend the war was distant, contained, irrelevant to their daily lives. That illusion tonight is gone. Russian state media rushed to reassure audiences, but their composure was off. There was a tightness in their delivery, a stiffness in their tone. They weren't just reporting, they were calming. Because for the first time, ordinary Russians heard an explosion not near the edge of the map, but in what they believed was their safe, protected interior. The psychological blow is as significant as the physical one. Meanwhile, Ukraine has stayed silent. Officially. No confirmation. No denial. And that silence is loud. In Ukraine, silence is often a signal. A clue that the method used to strike the target is not something they're ready to reveal. And a message to the Kremlin. If we reach this, what else can we reach? Privately, Ukrainian sources describe the operation as a message. They won't say more, but Western analysts believe the message is unmistakable. Tonight, the stakes have shifted. Deep inside NATO and U.S. command centers, monitoring levels have increased. Not crisis mode, not alarms, but heightened vigilance. Because whenever a strike this deep occurs inside a nuclear-armed nation, every scenario, even improbable ones, must be reconsidered. And this is just the beginning. Have you ever noticed how life hits hardest right when you start thinking everything is finally settling into place? It's almost like the universe tests you at the exact moment you begin to relax your shoulders. And that's exactly what happened next. A twist so sharp, so unexpected, that it didn't just shake the story, it redefined it. If part one was the calm before the storm, then what you're about to hear now is the thunderclap that changed everything. So sit tight, because part two opens with a moment that feels small at first, but later becomes the spark that lights the entire fire. The shift begins days had begun to pass in the same predictable rhythm. The same faces. The same conversation. The same routine that almost makes you forget anything could ever go wrong. But beneath that surface-level comfort, something subtle was shifting. Little signals, tiny changes in behavior, small hesitations in conversations that didn't feel like they belonged. Matt, you know that feeling when someone's smile starts to look just a little too practiced? Or when their replies suddenly feel delayed, like their mind is somewhere else entirely? That's when the unease begins, slowly, silently, but surely. And even though you try to ignore it, deep down you already know something is off. At first it seemed harmless. A few missed calls, a few short replies, a few canceled plans. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud. But patterns don't lie. And when a person's energy changes, their words can't hide it for long. But here's the thing. When you care about someone, you try to justify it. You tell yourself it's stress, or work, or family, or maybe they're just exhausted. You create excuses just so you don't have to face the possibility that the truth might hurt. That's where the story stood, right at the edge of denial and reality. A conversation that didn't feel like a conversation had happened on an ordinary evening. No dramatic music. No cinematic moment. Cinematic moment. Just a simple call. One that should have felt normal but didn't. The tone was different. The pauses were longer than the sentences. Every answer felt like it was being filtered through layers of hesitation. And the worst part? They kept saying and nothing's wrong while everything in their voice screamed the opposite. You've probably felt it too. When someone's silence is louder than their words. And that night, that silence said everything. But nothing could have prepared what came next. The revelation: there comes a moment in every story when the truth stops knocking softly and instead kicks the door open. For this story, that moment arrived unexpectedly, through something as simple as a message that wasn't supposed to be seen. A message that instantly connected all the dots that had been floating around unanswered. Suddenly, all the canceled plans made sense. All the excuses made sense. All the changed tones, the distant replies, the strange behavior. It all snapped into place like pieces of a puzzle that had been upside down. It wasn't betrayal in the loud movie-style sense. It was quieter, softer, but somehow more painful because of it. It wasn't the presence of someone else. It was the absence of the person you trusted. There are heartbreaks that come from lies, and then there are heartbreaks that come from realizing someone simply stopped choosing you. This was the second kind. The confrontation, no matter how strong you try to act, some truths demand to be addressed. So the conversation happened. The one both sides knew was coming, but nobody wanted to start. And here's the wild part. Even during the confrontation, the truth wasn't delivered directly. It came in fragments, in broken sentences, unfinished explanations, and layered emotions that couldn't decide if they were regret or relief. You ever notice how some people hurt you without meaning to? They don't want to, but they also don't want to stay. They apologize not because they wronged you, but because they're afraid of seeing you break. That's exactly what this moment felt like. And when the finally truth came out, it wasn't a dramatic confession. It was a quiet acknowledgement. I don't feel the same anymore. Sometimes 6 words can hit harder than 1,000, and just like that, everything changed. The aftermath. When the noise fades, reality echoes after any major shift, there's always that strange silence. The one that wraps around you like a cold fog. Everyone talks about heartbreak, but no one warns you about the emptiness that follows. That feeling of suddenly having all the time in the world, and yet having no idea what to do with it. Nights became longer, thoughts become heavier. Every memory felt sharper, every silence felt louder, and every song sounded like it was written specifically to hurt. That's the thing about losing someone who meant everything. The absence isn't just emotional, it's physical. You feel it in your chest, in your routine, in the things you no longer share with them. But hidden inside all that pain is something else. The beginning of transformation. The turning point pain changes people. Slowly, quietly, but inevitably. And after days of confusion, moments of frustration, and hours spent replaying every conversation, something finally shifted internally. Not as a dramatic epiphany, but as a small, calm realization. If someone can walk away from you, maybe they were never meant to stay. Growth doesn't begin the day you're hurt. It begins the day you decide the hurt won't control you anymore. And that realization marks the true beginning of part 3. Because from here on, the story moves from heartbreak to strength, from confusion to clarity, from loss to self-rebirth. But here's where it gets interesting. Sometimes the worst things that happen to you become the reason you rise in ways you never imagined. And this final part, it's exactly about that rise. So let's dive in. The first step, learning to breathe again. Heartbreak takes something from you that isn't easy to describe. It's not just the person you lose, it's the version of yourself that existed with them. A version that felt safe, understood, connected, and certain about where life was heading. When that version disappears, the first few days feel like walking through smoke. Every direction looks unclear, every thought feels heavy, and even something as simple as waking up becomes a task. You start replaying conversations, imagining different outcomes, questioning your worth, and wondering if you weren't enough. But here's the truth most people forget. Losing someone does not reduce your value. It only reveals theirs. And slowly, very slowly, the mind starts realizing that the world hasn't ended. It's just changing shape. Day by day, the breaths get deeper. The pain gets quieter, and the parts of you that were crushed begin to rebuild themselves silently, almost invisibly. That's how healing starts. The reconnection. Meeting yourself again, one of the strangest things about heartbreak is that it pushes you back into your own company, a place most people avoid. But solitude, when you finally sit with it, becomes one of the most powerful teachers. You begin noticing things about yourself you ignored, your habits, your thoughts, your real desires, your boundaries, your strengths, even the dreams you quietly abandoned while you were busy adjusting for someone else. There's a moment, and it happens to everyone, when you sit alone, maybe late at night, maybe in silence, and you realize, oh, wait, I'm still here. You're still breathing, still capable, still worthy of everything you once hoped for. This realization doesn't hit like lightning. It arrives softly. like morning light slipping through a window without making noise. A gentle reminder that even after being hurt, you still exist with purpose. And that becomes the foundation for everything that comes next. The growth. When pain turns into power as days turn into weeks, something starts shifting from within. You're no longer trying to understand why things ended. You're learning from it instead. Every heartbreak carries two choices. You either shrink from it, or you grow because of it. And this is where the transformation becomes obvious. Suddenly, you find yourself setting boundaries with people who don't deserve your energy. You stop accepting half-hearted emotions. You stop apologizing for wanting consistency, honesty, effort, and loyalty. You start protecting your peace like it's the most precious thing you own, because now you know what it costs to lose it. The world outside hasn't changed. You have. You start waking up with a little more clarity. You start taking care of yourself more intentionally. You start choosing people who choose you without hesitation. You begin valuing the peace you once overlooked, and slowly, the pain that once felt unbearable begins transforming into strength, the kind of strength that makes you say, I deserved better, and now I choose better. The moment that changes everything, healing doesn't announce itself. It just arrives one day. Maybe it's the day you hear their name and it doesn't sting. Maybe it's when you revisit an old memory and feel grateful instead of broken. Maybe it's when you realize you no longer check your phone waiting for a message that will never come. Whatever the moment is, it hits you unexpectedly. You survived something you thought would destroy you. And that realization lights a fire, not the fire of revenge or anger, but the fire of rebirth. Because now you're no longer tied to the past. You're no longer replaying what didn't work. You're no longer mourning the attention, energy, or love you gave. You're finally ready to move forward. The new chapter, becoming someone stronger, and here's the beautiful truth. Every heartbreak becomes a bridge. A bridge that leads you away from the person who didn't value you toward the person you're becoming now. This new version of you is quieter but stronger, softer but wiser, more open but more selective. You're no longer afraid of losing anyone because you finally understand that the right people don't leave. You also begin recognizing things you missed before. Sparkles the peace of being with someone who communicates. Sparkles the comfort of people who don't make you guess their intentions. Sparkles the value of love that stays consistent. Sparkles the importance of being loved without confusion. You realize the story didn't end. It transformed. The universe didn't take something from you. It cleared space. And somewhere in that space, something better is already on its way. The final message, your rise begins now, so here's how this story truly ends. Not with heartbreak, not with loss, not with sadness. It ends with rebirth. It ends with a stronger, wiser, more resilient version of you. The version that understands love doesn't break you. The wrong person does. The right person doesn't confuse you. They don't leave you guessing. They don't disappear when it's inconvenient. They don't stop choosing you. And until that person arrives, you learn to choose yourself. Because the most powerful transformation happens the moment you stop chasing love and start becoming it.